This started in the winter of 2012. I was 23 years old at the time and living with my dad. My mom and my brother were living in another house about 10 minutes away from us. One morning, I woke up around 8 a.m. because I had an early doctor's appointment. I went outside to see a note pinned to the windshield wiper of our car. The note said, "I'm going to kill you, pedophile scum." I kind of just laughed it off. I assumed the note was for my dad, who had a habit of complaining to parents in our neighborhood about their children's shitty behavior. For some background, there were these twin boys who liked to try and catch and torture squirrels. He often marched them home by the ears to complain about them to their parents. I thought one of the parents was just being a douchebag, so my dad and I didn't bother with it too much. Later in the day, while talking to my mom on the phone, I mentioned the note to her offhandedly in a very casual way, and I was shocked by her response. She responded by very emphatically warning me several times to make sure all of my windows and doors were locked and to bring a weapon to bed with me at night. I was a bit taken aback because she'd never said anything to me like that before. She'd never even given me the good touch, bad touch talk. She reminded me at least 12 times over the course of the conversation to bring a knife or a baseball bat to bed with me and to lock my bedroom door at night. I thought she was just overreacting, so I waved her off. Then other weird things started happening. We started getting random packages and deliveries sent to our house. There were Bibles and Qurans, newspapers, porn flyers, pizzas, and moving trucks that we hadn't ordered. The first few times it happened, I thought it was a mistake, but as it kept happening, I came to the conclusion that somebody must be pulling a prank on us. We didn't know who it was, so there was nothing we could really do about it but apologize profusely to yet another confused pizza delivery man. In September of that year, I started taking a night school class with my best friend. The course went from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every Monday and Wednesday night. After class, his mom would pick us up and drive us home. Sometime in November, his mom dropped me off from school and I went inside and chilled on the couch for a couple of hours. I like to wind down before I go to bed a bit or I can't sleep. I ended up falling asleep on the couch. Something woke me up abruptly at about 4 in the morning. I heard the unmistakable sound of a car tire being slashed, and it sounded like our car. What the hell was going on? We didn't have any enemies. In retrospect, this was probably a stupid thing to do, especially considering that I'm a relatively small female. I'm only 5'5" and I was 23 at the time, but I grabbed a generic kitchen knife and went outside to check it out. When I got outside, I discovered immediately that I was correct. There was a man in our driveway slashing our car tires. Unwisely, I immediately yelled and he turned around to face me. That was when I noticed what he was slashing our tires with. It was an enormous hunting knife, at least 6 inches long. He looked surprised but then defiant, and he began to advance towards me with the knife slightly raised. I just froze. I didn't know what to do. He was coming at me so fast that I couldn't even think. Thankfully, at that exact second, my across-the-street neighbor who had also heard him slashing our tires turned on his porch light and yelled out the window that they were calling the cops. The man yelled back that he didn't care, but he quickly retreated back to his car, where I could see a middle-aged woman with long brown hair waiting for him in the passenger seat. Our eyes locked and I knew instantly that we had met before, but I couldn't quite put my finger on when or where. I just knew in my gut that I had met this woman before. They sped off into the night and we called the cops, who said they couldn't do anything for us because they didn't know who had done it. I mean, isn't that kind of their job? I called my mom to tell her what happened and to ask her if she had any idea who would have done this to us. She immediately said no, but there was something in her voice. I could just tell that she wasn't being honest. A few weeks later, I decided to go to my mom's house to spend a day or two there. I was determined to get some answers. As soon as I walked in the front door, I knew something was wrong. The second she saw me, she just started bawling her eyes out. She took me by the hand and sat me on the couch. She then explained the whole story to me from start to finish. It's necessary for me to give a little bit of background information here. My mother is a businesswoman by trade and was still in sales at the time, but she's also a bit of a hippy-dippy type. She believes in astrology, reincarnation, and other similar stuff. In addition to her regular day job, she was also selling an all-natural brand of makeup that is free of parabens, oils, sulfates, and other common cosmetic additives. A couple of months before this all started, she had ended up being referred a new client named Andrea by her weed dealer. Yes, my mom smokes weed. We live in Canada and everyone smokes here. Andrea was her dealer's girlfriend and she was interested in buying makeup. So my mom invited her over to her apartment to look at some makeup samples. They started chatting a bit about a variety of topics and my mom let it slip her last name. As my mom told me, Andrea had paused for a few seconds and just looked at her. And then she asked if my mom is married to a man named Darren. My mom answered yes, Darren is my father and was her ex-husband. And then shockingly, this Andrea woman had actually burst into tears and threw her arms around my mom in a hug. She began to tell her this horrific story about all the disgusting things that my dad had done to her. Andrea is in her mid-30s now. Apparently when she was 14 years old, she had been dating a man named Andrew. He happened to be living with my dad at the time after my parents' divorce. This would have happened around 1994 and I was about 4 years old at the time. According to Andrea, her boyfriend Andrew and my father had taken turns beating her and sexually abusing her. They would force her to do sex work in order to make money off of her, and she had never recovered from this. At this point, I realized that this was where I'd recognized her from. My dad had been roommates with her boyfriend Andrew, and I used to see all three of them when I went over there to visit him every second weekend. She sobbed inconsolably during the whole retelling of this story, telling my mother how after this traumatic experience she had turned to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain of her abuse. She also said that she'd been addicted to crack and alcohol off and on ever since because of what my father had done to her. My mom was shocked and she didn't know what to do. On one hand, she knew my father to be a generous, soft-spoken, and kind person who had never lifted a finger to her or any other person. He rarely raised his voice. But on the other hand, it seemed odd that Andrea would just happen to remember his name all these years later if she had been lying. She didn't know who to believe. After several hours of crying and much consoling on my mother's part, Andrea finally left. That was when the stalking began. A few days after this encounter, my mother came home from work to find Andrea's boyfriend sitting on her couch waiting for her. He immediately told her that he was planning on taking revenge on my dad. He said my dad deserved to die because he was an evil scum. If my mom told anybody at all, especially the cops, he said he would be sure to kill me as well. He then concluded his threat by describing the layout of our living room and exactly what outfit I was wearing that day. From then on, he or Andrea would text or call her several times a day to threaten and taunt my mother. They would tell her that they were going to call the cops on my dad and have him thrown in prison. They said they were going to have him killed and that if she told anybody, they would hire somebody to murder me. Naturally, my mother was absolutely terrified. She was from an upper-middle-class family who had immigrated to Canada from Germany, and she had never dealt with this type of person before. She stopped eating, she couldn't sleep, and she even stopped going to work. She lost 30 pounds and her hair started falling out from stress. She started having panic attacks because she didn't know what to do. Later on, she told me that she understood how I felt now because I have an anxiety disorder that causes me to experience panic attacks. Eventually, after the night I almost got stabbed, she decided that she had to call the cops. She couldn't take the chance that they would hurt me. She had to do something about it, and what she found out was shocking. Andrea was well known to the police. When my mom told them this story, she was so well known that they weren't even surprised to hear her story. In fact, they told her Andrea had done this exact thing to at least a dozen other men. She would meet and blackmail men into giving her money, gadgets, drugs, and other things, threatening to call the cops and report them for rape if they didn't. As it turned out, her boyfriend was a dealer of drugs other than just weed, and he would often use his drug connections to intimidate and extort the men. For some twisted reason, he never questioned Andrea's stories of being abused and enslaved by all of these different men. Maybe he genuinely believed that she was telling the truth. It happened that Andrea remembered my father's name because he was roommates with her ex back then. That made us her next target. After some time, Andrea would get arrested on a possession and drug distribution charge. She'd attempt to make deals with the police by offering them information about criminals and sexual offenders in exchange for less time in prison. She eventually did this so many times that the police stopped believing her. After my mom called the cops, the whole story came undone. Andrea and her boyfriend haven't bothered us since, thankfully. It's been a while since the whole thing happened, and I'm still terrified to leave the curtains open at nighttime in case somebody's watching me. I don't think I'll ever be able to feel fully safe in this house ever again. This happened a long time ago when I was in high school. My mom just recently found the paperwork about it when she cleaned out her office upon retiring from the police department. I remember being upset and scared when it happened, but reading the details as an adult, it sounded even worse than I remembered. I am female and I was 17 working at a flower and gift shop at the time. It's nighttime and a man comes in. He was short, overweight, balding, in his 40s and gave off a creepy vibe. He tells me about how he needs an apology gift for his girlfriend, so I offer a bouquet, obviously. He says she doesn't like flowers because they die. This was the first weird thing as he came into a flower shop. Then he goes into detail about how he hit her and asks me if I think he was right to do so. This was long ago, so I don't remember exactly what I answered, but I think it was something along the lines of not if you want her to continue being your girlfriend. He then tells me what a great job I'm doing and asks when I get off of work. I dodge answering and he leaves. There was nothing for 6 months after that. Then right before Valentine's Day, he walks in the door 1 minute before I closed shop. It was dark and from the outside, it looked like I was working alone as my coworker was in the bathroom. She's a 40-year-old female, by the way. Instinctively, it felt like a predator had just entered the room. You know when something isn't right and everything felt not right. I then notice he has a tarnished revolver tucked into the front of his windbreaker, which is halfway unzipped. It was obvious he wanted it seen. I quickly scribbled a note to my coworker that said he has a gun and handed it to her when she came out of the bathroom. She calmly walked to the phone and looked at me, wordlessly asking if she should call the cops. I shook my head no, as I felt like it would escalate the situation. God forbid he heard the police coming and took us hostage or something. I was just going to try and act as calm and normal as I could, and hopefully not tip the situation into something more dangerous. He spends 15 minutes wandering around what was a fairly small shop. In retrospect, he was probably waiting to see if my coworker would leave, as it was now well past closing. Finally, he places an order for pickup on Valentine's Day, which gives me his name and details for the police report I'm sure as hell about to file. He buys a card and pulls out a wad of $100 bills. He slowly thumbs through them as though looking for the right one with which to pay for his $40 order. I ask him if he wants a bag, as it wouldn't be very inconspicuous if he just showed up at home with the Valentine's card. He replies, no. I didn't feel like being inconspicuous tonight. That seemed like an obvious reference to the gun hanging out of his coat. He leaves and we quickly lock the door and watch him sit in his truck outside. We were not about to exit the shop until he was gone. Finally, he pulls out of his parking spot and just moves to another spot further away. He continues to just sit there. I don't know how long we waited, but he finally left. I called my mom crying. She called the police, who came to the shop the next day to take a report. I told my best friend at the time what happened, and she told her mother. Her mother happened to work with the same creepy man and informed security at her job. She said he was very weird and liked to talk about weapons a lot. The security at their company, which is a large business that deals with government tech and security contracts, pulled him into their office and questioned him about it. The man claimed it was a glove in his pocket and not a revolver. The police were definitely pissed that his company made contact with him about it before they did, as he successfully dodged the cops' multiple calls and visits to his apartment. My mom, much to my teen fury at the time, made me quit my job. It was devastating as I loved it there. In retrospect, it seems to be the right call. The dude came in on Valentine's Day and picked up his order. Thankfully, I never saw him again. I use Tinder pretty frequently, and it's usually a good experience. So I match with this guy named Charlie, and he seems pretty cool. He's really cute and into music, which is appealing since I also sing and play piano. We chat for a bit, and eventually, I agree to meet him at his place. In hindsight, meeting a stranger at their home was probably my first mistake. Since I don't drive, I take an Uber to his place, which is a bit far and ends up being quite pricey. When he buzzes me into the apartment complex, I get this unsettling feeling but brush it off as nerves. I go up to the third floor where he's waiting at the door. Everything seems fine initially. We chill, smoke a couple of bowls, and watch a movie. Then he makes a move and I go along with it. We end up on the bed, getting intimate, when suddenly he wraps his hands around my neck and starts squeezing really hard. Now, I don't mind this kind of thing in the right setting, but alone in a stranger's house without any prior discussion is not one of those settings. I literally can't breathe and feel like I'm turning blue. He's relentless, yelling at me with this wild look in his eyes, asking if I'm scared. And yes, I am absolutely terrified because it feels like he's trying to kill me. I struggle and finally manage to wriggle out of his grasp and start screaming. He's telling me to calm down while I'm frantically trying to get dressed. He grabs my wrist as I try to leave, but I use all my strength to pull away and slam the door behind me. As it closes, he hurls a nasty insult at me. When I get home, I look in the mirror and see bruises all over my neck. I try to cover them up with makeup, but it's clear that I look like someone who has just been through a terrifying ordeal. Later, he texts me something crude and offensive, implying that I can take on two guys at the same time. I can't believe his nerve and block him immediately, reporting him on Tinder. I wish I could have done more because I genuinely believe he could have killed me. I've been debating going to the police, but the bruises are gone now, and it's a case of his word against mine. Still, I'm seriously considering it because the next person might not be as lucky as I was. I was about 21 or 22 and living by myself at the time, and I left my window open on a pleasant night. It was low enough to the ground that you could get in if you really tried, but the screen wasn't easy to take off and I lived in a fairly safe neighborhood. That's why I didn't even think twice about it. I woke up in the middle of the night because I smelled smoke and I reached out to turn on my lamp and my hand hit what was very obviously a person. My brain fully woke up at that point and I realized there was a shirtless man in my bedroom. He's smoking a cigarette and staring at me. I remember yelling for him to get out, and I must have spooked him just as badly as he spooked me because he leapt out my window and took off. I slammed it shut and moved a bookcase in front of it. And when I went out the next morning in the daylight, I found the screen sitting against the house. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and I haven't slept with a window more than cracked ever since. I also absolutely refused to live on the ground floor of a building. I don't know if he was planning to rob me or what, but it was absolutely terrifying and makes me wonder how many times it happened and I didn't wake up. A couple years back, I woke up at 3 a.m. to see someone walk past my bedroom door. I called out thinking maybe my boyfriend had come over while I was sleeping but got no response, so I knew it wasn't him. I got out of bed, stupidly forgetting to take my phone or any kind of defensive item with me, and went into the front room where the light was on to be met with a random guy staring at one of the walls. I asked him who he was and got no answer. At this point, I'd actually woken up enough to realize I could really be in trouble, so I ran back to the bedroom, grabbed my phone, and ran outside on the phone to the police, who showed up within a few minutes. Turns out the guy was mentally ill, and to this day neither myself or the police know how he got in. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more horror stories. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.